if you would follow the rules that we have today, we would probably not add the creeper.
We've all thought about it, but Jeb just confirmed that the current Minecraft game design rules would not permit the creeper to be added. This means one of two things must be true. Either the creeper was a poor game design decision to do, or the game rules clearly need changing because they do not allow for adding interesting and now iconic features. Which of these is it? Well, hello, I'm AbYeXToyCat, and I want to do a quick 5-part dive into Minecraft game design, starting with... This section isn't about any personal grudge I have with the creeper. I happen to quite like the guy, nor is it about the fact that Notch technically didn't aim to make the creeper. He was looking to make a pig, and so in that sense, it is a bad game design feature because it was an accident. But instead, I want to talk about how Minecraft has a set of game design principles. This is known as Jeb's Green Book, and in that book, there are just 48 pages that they give to every Mojang employee and ask them to read before designing features. And keep in mind, this is a book that contains just 48 pages, 24 of which are pictures, and so of the remaining 24, there are big rules in there which they think are so important, such as one block at a time. The primary principle is that all actions interact with one block at a time. You break one block, pull one lever, or till one block of dirt, and they say that even if you do other things like planting a tree, blowing up TNT, or activating a network of redstone, it should all start with a single interaction of one block. Now, this is a rule which is immediately broken by the creeper, which can obviously, without the player's interaction, destroy a whole bunch of blocks. But even worse is this rule that bad things happen, but it's always technically the player's fault. Is it your fault for not lighting up literally every single block and then not noticing the creeper, which is largely silent until it's basically too late for him to blow up? Well, this is very much debatable to say the least, but the biggest argument against the creeper is this section which says bugs are not features. It is very widely known at this point, but if you haven't heard, the creeper is just a pig, but designed with the wrong X and Y dimensions, and so it very much was a bug that is turned into a feature. This goes against so many of the game design rules, and the only game design rule which positively mentions it is the fact that hostile mobs should be unique, and the creeper is wildly unique, so great job to him for having 4 weird pig legs all being on one side of the body. But otherwise, the creeper is a mob that goes against the very basic principle of Minecraft, and is one which many people have remarked would not be added to Minecraft today, including, by the way, the Minecraft's chief creative officer himself, Jeb, as of this week. And so it's interesting to look at, because even though this is true, if we look at mobs that have been added in recent-ish history, like the Phantoms or the Elder Guardian, these are far more hated, despite doing far less to annoy you and being far more avoidable. If you want to avoid Phantoms, just sleep once every real-life hour or so. If you want to avoid Elder Guardians, don't go so deep in the ocean, or do it, but kill them because they only spawn once. Every other mob is far easier to avoid and far less annoying, and yet the creeper manages to be less hated than any of them, or at least when it is hated in an iconic and lovable way, which is interesting. And so if the creeper is actually, better than all of these other mobs, despite being broadly quite similar, maybe it's not the creeper that's the problem, it's the game design rules which are to blame. So we just went into Minecraft's game design, obviously, to talk about how it contradicts with the creeper, but it is worth mentioning that Minecraft's game design is something that Jeb did a really good job putting together, and although this booklet was never meant to be made public, it's only public because of weird laws about Swedish book publishing and how that works. So this was found in a library and isn't meant to be read, but it's an absolutely beautiful read into the genius in Jeb's mind that has kept the game going for so long. So many of these rules really give us a decent peek as to how it is that Minecraft has been kept alive after so long. Minecraft is not an editor, is something that I have a particular fondness for. It's something that many people forget about when it comes to mods and add-ons, and indeed, I think that there's a beautiful anecdote in here about the redstone repeater, which Jeb initially wanted to add with delays of 1, 2, 4, and 7, so you could make any number from 1 to 15, but then later decided that 1, 2, 3, and 4 would be simpler. And yeah, would you have ever understood the repeater if the delays were so random in that way? Simple notes like this show that Jeb understands that it's worth making something simple and easy to understand so that players can decide to do the creativity rather than, the game kind of pre-creativing for you. This is something that is really cool and kind of describes why furniture's a doesn't exist, for example. But what's interesting is the fact that if we look further, you can see that there are so many examples of these, but then you might say in response, well, clearly these rules aren't good if they immediately are proven wrong by the creeper, but actually read this section. New features need to be respectful of existing ones. New features need to adapt to the balance of other features. Different is more interesting than better, and that's true for both gameplay mechanics and power metrics. This, in other words, means that when they added, say, the horse, they didn't make the minecart pointless. When they added the elytra, they didn't make the horse and the minecart pointless, and when they're adding the lunge spear or the new minecarts that they intend to add, they're not going to replace existing things, rather work around them and provide new options. This is something that is relevant because what's this in the background of the image they attach? Oh, is that a creeper there? Yes, these game design rules do account for the creeper. These were a notch feature, and so one Jeb might not have decided to add, but he is actually being respectful of it being there, and so at some point you have to say, like, well, actually, isn't this a bit like, I don't know, the Normans invaded England in 1066, and they killed a bunch of people, and then after killing a bunch of people and establishing government, they said that murder is bad. They say killing people isn't okay anymore, but can you have a system that's based around the idea that killing people is bad if you had to kill a bunch of people to get there? Can you remove the accomplishments of the system that you have because of the fact that it was gotten via things that your system would not allow? It's an interesting question that I think is worth considering in in a broader concept, but for now we can just say that either, Jeb, or rather Notch, is the beautiful game designer that made everything beautiful to begin with and everything is amazing and comes from him, or that there was a very different design philosophy and the new design philosophy actually incorporates the old one despite not actually wanting to replicate it into the future. This is how naturally things should work with multiple creative directors, but it does then raise the next logical question, which is... And honestly, my instinct towards this is to say yes, because I have nostalgia for so many features from the early days of Minecraft, because to me, they were the features I first started playing Minecraft with. There are so many dumb things about the early games, such as the fact that you couldn't, use the fortune enchantment or on oars. You weren't able to go swimming. It was really dumb. You had to, like, slowly float up and down through the water. And monster rooms were the only structure designed by Notch, I believe, and they're clearly the least exciting by a wide margin, despite having so much in there, that should make them incredible. I just never enjoy them that much. However, this is clearly, in my opinion, a show of different priorities, because the things Jeb have added have been great in some ways. I love the trial chambers. I think that it is what the monster room should have been. I love the small additions made to the oceans in the aquatic update, and honestly, when it comes to caves, despite Notch originally calling it Cave Game, I think that the Caves and Cliffs update is so much better in terms of what should have been done in the underground to begin with. In fact, having the caves originally only go down 64 blocks seems like a huge fundamental mistake from the beginning. However, ultimately, I think that despite the fact that when you objectively measure it, Jeb looks better in this way, this is people then ignoring all of the downsides that come in modern Minecraft development. I mean, obviously, you can see the fact that things like combat take 7 years to do now because they're being designed by a committee that seems to be not very interested. You can see the fact that we get a new structure every 2-ish years now, and that's if you count the Trail Ruins as a structure, which, technically they are one, but really. Ultimately, I think that modern Minecraft does move at a different pace, and you could argue a lot of this is due to the difference in how design is done. Design can be done via a long series of deep discussions about what is perfect for the game, or design can be done by saying, let's flip a switch and just decide to do this. This is best seen when looking at the difference between Bedrock and Java. Bedrock wants to redesign the menus very slightly because they currently look like they're made for a mobile game, despite having a ridiculous number of console players and also not being very well optimized for mobile either. And so what are they doing? Well, they're in the first part of a multi-year design consultancy where they're going to spend years A/B testing every micro part and slowly moving over to a hybrid layout and hopefully having a menu that doesn't lag, whereas Java could just decide one day, why don't we have amplified worlds where the terrain goes into the sky? Wouldn't that be fun? I think that this second ideology is how you get fun things in the game, and ultimately is what snapshots and betas should probably be there for, but noticeably we've seen fewer of these into the current, and so either you could say that Notch was better for not doing this, and indeed you could, I think this argument is one I would be tempted to make, but I would also argue it's hard to actually compare Notch features versus Jeb features because they're products of their time. Notch, things designed by Notch were made in 2010 for what was literally an indie game in an office of 3 people, whereas features made by Jeb are part of a giant, multi-billion-dollar franchise that has to worry about how this new feature will affect the profitability of a brand new theme park ride. Those are real, by the way, very excitingly. There's a lot of interesting questions that come from this, and honestly, the answers are very tricky, and so I would say that did Notch do it better? I don't think that you could argue the Creeper was actually better than the Phantom in any way, and so I would say the actual reason that there is a difference between these is because early games have more flexibility. Let's compare the Phantoms and the Creeper. The Phantom is a very minor nudge that encourages you to sleep, and it does so by saying if you don't sleep in 3 days, well, you'll get attacked every now and then. The Creeper, on the other hand, is a maximal nudge towards not being outside at night, and the downside is if you are outside at night at any point in time, the Creeper might spawn somewhere, he won't die, and then he can follow you and destroy your entire house. Seriously, the consequences are that maximal. It is something that could never be added to any game today, whether it's Jeb or Notch, and I think that the reason is not because of any game design booklet, it's not because that, any philosophy that comes from anyone, but instead it's because it's been in the game from such an early point that 99.9% of players just know survival as being the game mode where you can't stay out late, and the whole reason you build houses and do everything else is because if you don't, mobs will spawn and they will kill you, and some of those mobs that want to kill you are exploding phallic green looking devices that will destroy your entire home and everything you care about, and ultimately that is what makes it so different. If there is a great gameplay reason for something to be annoying, it actually kind of works, but you can only have great game design reasons for something being annoying if it's entirely instanced, like how DLC works, or if you do it very early on. And so that raises the question, therefore, if creepers couldn't be added today, but they could be added back then, by anyone ultimately, is Minecraft doomed today then? Well, that's a very different question. And the answer is kind of tricky, because on the one hand, we've seen Mojang move away from these big yearly updates. The idea was meant to be that they would design one part of the game to be hugely different and better, and to kind of upgrade the inner workings, but after enough years, these started to be disliked by the community, and so now they're adding back flexibility via the drop system. This is working in theory, but in practice, it's a bit different, because on the one hand, we're getting lots of new content, which is following the new game design rules, such as firefly bushes, or we're getting happy ghasts or whatever, but actually these are kind of just ignoring some of the big issues that come from the fact that Minecraft now has less flexibility of what to add. Take, for example, the combat system. This is roughly a decade out of date on Bedrock, but it's now been so out of date that it's accepted by hundreds of millions of players as the combat system, and so now instead of actually updating it, as Jeb did in 2019, we're just tinkering around the edges rather than fixing it with things like the spear, and so as a result we have all sorts of weird mishmash systems because they don't want to change old systems to match new ones, or they don't want to play around with some things that people just expect because it's been there too long. Take color as a really interesting example of this. I actually learned this because of a mistake that I made in a short this week where I said that the Happy Ghast had more customization options than the horse if you're talking about things you can do for your mount, because the Happy Ghast has 16 types of armor versus the Nautiluses and horses 5. But this isn't actually true on a technical level, because the way that color works is hugely different for, say, leather armor versus wool. Dyeing leather armor is a really clever system, by the way. You can add color to your leather armor, and you can get 16 colors that way, but then you can add a second color to get one of 256 colors, and you can do that again and again and again to get millions of different combinations. But that really clever system is used for horses, but not the Happy Ghast. The Happy Ghast has 16 different items, which means you have less customization and far more inventory clutter, but the same is true for stained glass, or maybe you could argue for sheep and for wool, or for concrete too. And so is this weird mishmash of systems something we should blame Notch for not implementing more fully, or is it something we blame Jeb for implementing a little bit here and then kind of half committing on? Well, I think probably the answer is a bit of both, but actually I think that clearly Minecraft is really struggling with adding and making decisions that should actually impact the game in the long run in a positive way. If Minecraft had just committed to making a combat update in 2019, it would have been bad for 2019 Minecraft, but now we would have 6 years of that great new system. If Minecraft had just committed, when they decided to add the new leather armor system, to make this work for all armors in the future, including, say, carpets for llamas, or the mounts for the Happy Ghast, or dare I even say, the shulker box and all of the other blocks too, then we would have a much more functional system, which would be far less confusing, because bear in mind, it's not actually just two systems of either dyeing the blocks or having the dyed leather armor that's a combination of dyes, but there's also the third system because it's different as to how you dye things on Bedrock and Java. There are so many big questions like this that could have been solved if long-term decisions were made early, but instead we see the long-term decisions being avoided, and instead we get all sorts of weird short-term decisions, such as the removal of the giant iceberg flat biome from Bedrock, which I would like to remind you, Minecraft themselves love. They used it to show off the spear, but yeah, we have all sorts of weird inconsistencies starting to form around the edges. Even just the idea that, you know, the amount of damage that a weapon shows on Bedrock versus Java, it's hugely different for reasons that aren't clear to anyone. But yeah, the final question is, should the Creeper be added today? And honestly, if you look at the Phantom, or if you look at the game design rules, and if you look at what Jeb says, you would probably say no. But I would like to say that actually, the Phantom is a weird edge case because it just doesn't encourage you enough to do what it is they're trying to get done. I think that the Creeper works so well, not because it's just always existed. This is just an easy, explanation that does make sense too, and probably contributes, but instead I would say that it's partly down to the fact that the Creeper is there to encourage you to change your behavior in a way that is more fun. This is why the Phantom is hated, because it only slightly nudges you towards sleeping more often, something you would already always be doing if there was any good reason to do so. Whereas, take the Warden for example, it's the most annoying mob in the game, but it's there specifically to say, yes, coming here will be a nightmare and you will struggle, but the point is to not do the, activation of the Shulk Screakers. The point is that you don't want him to appear, and so that is what makes it work so well. When you have a mob that is so bad that you'll go through everything to avoid it, that is actually decent game design. But personally, I like Minecraft being harder and I could rant about that all day. So instead, I'll say thank you for watching today's video. This is just a fun deep dive into game design that I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, consider liking, favoriting, and subscribing. We dive into Minecraft news with this sort of angle on things almost every single day on this channel, so make sure you catch it if you want to. But for now, I'll see you next time, and spooky outro time.